So welcome back to the VWIDTalk podcast. We're recording an audio version of our episode here. Jan and I did a pretty good deep dive into what the actual retrofit process is. So if you want to see a longer video on that, you can check us out on the YouTube channel where we go into detail with pictures and wiring diagrams and things. But here we're going to talk a little bit more about just what is the retrofit process that you use when you're trying to put, usually here we're talking about retrofitting a factory mod that was not available in our market, but might have been available in other markets. And what process should you go through to determine if you're going to be able to do it? And that's basically what we're going to do here. Jan, what do you think? What are we talking about today?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly exactly that. We also did talk with Nima from Kufatech, who do professional retrofits, meaning they'll give you everything you need, but sometimes the feature that you really want may not be available, and you want to roll up your sleeves and start fitting the pieces in place, determining the electric feasibility or the coding or adaptation.
Right.
What we found is that sometimes, and maybe Wes, this is just my problem, right? Because I get usually like very enthusiastic and kind of order the part. And when the part is in, I realize like, oh my goodness, this is much, much harder than what I thought it would be.
If it makes you feel any better, no, that is not just your problem.
Okay.
That's my problem too. I buy one of these things and I'm like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? So I think the good part about what we're talking about here is this should help you determine if this can be done a little better before you go spend that money.
Yes.
And that's kind of the goal of this. And if you're somebody who doesn't do this kind of thing very often, hopefully this will help you determine a little bit better. The great thing about Kufatech is if you order from them, they come as a kit where it comes with a wiring harness that's pre-made, and they give you a little dongle that does the coding you need, right? So what we're talking about here is you're going to have to determine what kind of connector you need and wire it up yourself, which is not terrible, but that's not for everyone.
So why don't we go through the framework? So in the framework, it's pretty much three things. Okay. It's about mechanical feasibility. So would it physically fit in place?
Okay.
Right. So for example, if you would want to put Audi taillights on a Volkswagen, that might be a mechanical problem because the shapes of the vehicle are different. Then two, it's electrical feasibility, meaning are all the wires, are all the signals in the right place? And is the connector there? Or do you need to manufacture the harness and maybe repin the connector? Mm-hmm. And then three is the coding, or not necessarily that when we say coding, we don't mean that you would need to write code, but the other modules in the car or the modules in the car need to somehow understand that there is something new that they need to be able to talk to. And so those controllers need to be adapted so that they know that there is something else, some different feature in the car. And so those are the three kind of areas that we have identified after number of retrofits that we've done.
Right. When we say coding, like Jan said, we don't mean, we mean configuration. You're changing the codes. You don't mean writing C++. You don't have to be a computer programmer, but you do have to know your way around using these coding tools. Normally, we use VCDS, Jan and I both, but then you run into issues like being able to unlock the software in your car.
So maybe why don't we talk a little bit more about each of the three? Do you want to take the mechanical feasibility, or do you want me to start?
I'll do mechanical. I'll let you do electrical. Okay. So mechanical it seems obvious, but it might be the easiest thing. I mean, it's pretty clear most of the time. Will it physically fit? And we're going to use, let's use Jan. Jan had two things that he did. We'll use those as an example. The first one is the taillights for the ID4. He wanted to replace them with the taillights from, I guess it's an ID5 GTX. Is that correct?
It's actually sold as well. The taillights are the same for both ID4 and ID5. And there might be standard on the GTX, but they're also in Europe orderable as on a higher trim, as a
so they
higher...
They do have an ID4 GTX in the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
they do have both.
Okay,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So either ID4 or ID5. So Jan's point was he wanted to do these taillights. And so the big question was, will the things fit in there physically? And the good news there is, they bolt right in. You unscrew the old ones and you screw the new ones right in the same place as the old ones. And so they physically fit. And that's the most important thing. And another example of the same thing where it's not quite so easy, but almost, is the GTX accent lights that go on the front lower grills and the front bumper cover. And Jan, you bought these parts, you got the lights, and then discovered that, number one, it didn't look quite right. The lights, there's something missing. And it's because there's a fascia, like a grill, a little plastic trim that mounts in front of those lights to make it look the way it's supposed to look. And in addition, there is a bumper support piece that you screw the lights and that fascia into that replaces the regular bumper support piece behind the bumper. So it is mechanically feasible, but there's more involved than you would initially think. You don't just order the lights, you have to order these 3 parts. And so it takes some investigation to figure out, looking on PartsLink 24 or other sites, like what's involved, what do I need here? Sometimes you order the part and you're going to get it and be like, wait, this doesn't fit. It can fit. You just need to order all 3 of the right things, and you have to know you don't always know what you don't know. So luckily in this case, both of these parts are mechanically feasible. And I guess the last thing we'd say is Jan's example where you were able to get some physical buttons from the Skoda Enyaq. Is that right?
Yeah, Skoda Enyaq. Yeah.
And they replace the capacitive touch underneath our ID4 touchscreen below the volume control and climate control things, where it says like mode and climate and emergency blinker and park and whatever the other things are. And so those buttons, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but you got those physical buttons and they electrically work. They can plug in and work, but you got to find a way. If you want to fit them into the dash, you're going to have to custom fabricate, probably through 3D printing, some kind of a frame to hold them in place.
Yep, precisely.
So it's sort of mechanically feasible, but not without some skill and some design work. So those are 3 examples. One of something that's mechanically feasible with a direct bolt-in. One that's mechanically feasible if you know to buy the extra support parts. And then the third, which would be the least desirable, is that you have to fabricate some kind of a mount or a shroud or a cowl, what do you call it, like a bezel, to hold that in place. So that's it. So Jan, why don't you tell us about electrical feasibility?
Yeah. So the electrical feasibility, there are pretty much similar layers of the onion as you described on the mechanical feasibility. Okay. And so one example is when we retrofit Euro taillights in the Mark V Jetta, all wiring was there. The connector was the same. I just had to repin the connector and adapt the controller unit, and the taillight worked. So that was the easiest. What I've discovered with the Euro taillights for the ID4, it was more difficult because not only that VW is doing minimal wiring, meaning they didn't route the blinker wire, but also the IQ taillights, as they call them, or 3D taillights, they are driven very differently because they have some animation sequences. And these animation sequences are driven by a computer that is inside of these taillights. And as such, they need to sit on a LIN bus that actually communicates with the with one of the main computers of the car and tells it what to do. So that was fundamentally different. And also what was interesting is that the connector was 8-pin as the old connector, but was differently coded. There was a notch on the connector that made it not physically plug into the taillight.
So it was physically keyed so that you couldn't plug that 8-pin connector into the same.
Correct.
And of course you could modify your taillight by cutting off the notch in there to keep.
But it wouldn't help either because those taillights are completely differently powered, so they wouldn't work either.
Right. So not only do you have to get the different connector to make it physically fit or modify your taillights, you also need to repin it and not just reorganize the pins, but add additional wires.
Exactly.
That are missing. And those would be the turn signal wire, the LIN bus wire, and a 12-volt wire. Is that correct?
Yep. Okay. Precisely. Yeah, precisely. And so that's the example of the taillights. There are some additional retrofits. Like, for example, if we want to add 360 camera to our cars, then, of course, we would need to install the 4 additional cameras or at least 3 new cameras, front and the side, but also a specific controller unit and all the wiring so that the retrofit gets much harder because you need to not only install the cameras, but also the additional controller unit that was not installed by the factory.
And does that controller go under the aluminum plate that's underneath, or I guess steel plate underneath the rear seat cushion?
Yes, there is a special retainer bracket. We can do a deep dive on this, because I already have the bracket, and because you're recording the podcast, it won't be any good if I would show it to you.
Yeah, okay.
Because our listeners won't be able to see it. But it's actually a nice chunky bracket. I was surprised by the sturdiness of it. Well, it's also helping with cooling. And it, exactly as you said, goes behind the back seat. So.
Yeah. So interestingly, this is something that Jan, I remember you telling me. We don't need to get too deep into the 360 camera retrofit right now. But what's interesting is that even though our cars came with a rear reversing camera, the reversing camera on the cars without the 360 degree aerial view kit, all of the processing is done in the camera unit.
In the camera.
The processing that adds the lines. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The lines, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As you're turning the steering wheel, there are lines that are bending. So this bending is done in the camera. But of course, if you have the 360 cameras, all the stitching and all these lines are done in that main unit, if you will, in the specifically dedicated controller for the 360 camera.
So the point is that even if you have the reverse camera already, you still need to get a different camera, plus the two side cameras, plus the front camera, plus the camera control module that does all the magic to stitch the 360 image together.
Yes. Plus, of course, the wiring harness that is not installed in the car.
Yeah. And so then that brings us to the coding or adaptation feasibility, which is once you've done all that, you've figured out all the parts you need, they mechanically fit, you've wired up everything to the right pin and the right connector, everything's got the right power, the right signal. Well, then how do you tell the car that this module is there and make it interact with the others? So one question is, are you getting modules that are from different versions of software, from later versions of vehicles? Okay. Or are you getting modules that you didn't happen to get that with your trim level, but it'll work perfectly fine with the modules you got? What modules?
So there's one thing that I would say, Wes, is that for the electrical feasibility, it's a good news because it is relatively nicely documented in official VW wiring diagrams. So from the wiring diagrams, you can figure it out. If you go to urban.vw.com or .de, you can get those wiring diagrams. The coding adaptation feasibility, because this is something that VW does not officially support, so it's not this is not documented by VW, and as such, for the coding adaptation feasibility, there's a lot of experimentation. But of course, this is where the VWIDTalk or VW or other forums like VCDS forum really pay off, because there are crazy people like us who may have already done these mods. They exactly tell you how to code your car.
Right. Some people are even crazier than us, as hard as that is to believe. But they don't have what they call an SVM code for these mods. For instance, my trailer hitch mod has a trailer control unit that you install, and the trailer control module comes with an SVM code that your dealer or an independent shop that has Otis, which is the Volkswagen factory software, can enter this SVM code, and it essentially tells the software to do all the changes. It's like a script. It's a cheat code, like a video game cheat code. And it just it's a 3-digit code, and it makes all the changes you need. Well, these aren't official upgrades, so we don't have that. So what we're doing is downloading a complete readout of the configurations and adaptations. And what is that called, Jan?
Yeah, it's an adaptation map.
An adaptation map terms. From a car that we know has the feature. And then you download the adaptation map from your own car, and and if you're a programmer, you know what a diff is. You do a software diff, and it shows you the difference between the two files. And then you have to figure out which difference has something to do with the modification you're trying to make, and which ones are completely irrelevant. They have something to do with something else. And some of this is trial and error. But the best thing to do, obviously, is to search these forums at VWIDTalk and VW and Rostec if you're using VCDS. Before you do this, and hopefully somebody's already figured out, like Jan has with these taillights, you figured out the 8 or 10 adaptations that need to be made. And this is not very many, but it took you hours to figure out which ones to change.
It took me actually months because it wasn't easy. The coding was across 2 different controllers, the central electronic and also the gateway, the ICAS one. So there was more changes than I wanted. But
because you're a gentleman, you have done all that work and shared it with the community. So
Yes.
it won't take you months. It will take you, if you can unlock those modules, it'll take you 10 minutes.
Yep.
So thank you, Jan. But yeah,
Sure,
so I mean,
pleasure.
you had to figure out by comparing those things meticulously. And luckily for the light controllers, you don't need to change any modules because the only control unit is built into the lights themselves, right? You just need to program. You just need to do those adaptations.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
correct. We were very lucky that VW has not removed the code to talk to the taillights from
Yes.
US car. They could have done it too, right?
Yeah.
And without that, the Euro taillights won't be working at all. So I think we are lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be any reason for them to remove them as long as the hardware is not different. But you might expect if the hardware was different, which it is in many of these cases, the modules are missing chips and things. Maybe they wouldn't include the same software.
Yep.
So yeah, it is. We are very lucky in that sense.
Yep. Totally.
So luckily in this case, the coding adaptation can be done. It was just a lot of work on Jan's part. But in the case of like your GTX accent lights, there's no adaptation needed at all, right? You just plug them into the electrical connector.
There might be one adaptation.
Okay, so that may be to be determined. Okay.
That's to be determined. It seems like in the forum, in the VWIDTalk, we kind of have a sense of what adaptation it could be, because these GTX style lights are powered from the main headlights.
Okay.
So they don't lead back into the car through the firewall, but they're connected as an additional pin in the MX-1 and MX-2, meaning the front headlights, the left and right headlights.
MX-1, MX-2 are front headlight assemblies, and MX-3 and MX-4 are the rear taillight assemblies.
Yeah, taillights.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And as far as do you have any idea with the 360 retrofit? Is this like 2 or 3 adaptations, or are you talking 30 or hundreds? We don't have any idea yet.
I'm not sure. I already tried to wire it up not mechanically, electrically. So I did plug it in. I unplugged the rear camera and I plugged it in. It worked. But of course, what, for example, the car needs to understand now is that if you're driving forward slowly, you want it to project the front camera, right? So there is some adaptation that needs to be done to enable that. And how to do that, I don't know yet. And so there definitely is some adaptation that we need to figure out.
But Kupatech knows.
They likely know, but I'm also thinking that this retrofit has been done on the MQB platform, on the ICE vehicles from Volkswagen. And so I would be hoping that there would be similarities between the MEB and MQB platform.
Almost certainly.
Coding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. But we just don't know yet if this is 2 adaptations or 200 adaptations. We really don't know. Okay.
Yeah, we really don't know.
So we'll find out.
So we will find out. All right. So this was the framework: mechanical feasibility, electrical feasibility, and the coding/adaptation feasibility.
Yeah, and hope to God that someone like Jan has done this before, so that all you have to do is use your Google powers and go search or Bing powers, as it were, and search Rostech or VW Vortex or the IDTalk forums and see how this is done. But if there's a mod you're planning for the first time, those are the first steps. Will it fit? Can you make it work electrically? And can you code it to make it talk to the right computers?
Yep. Totally. And if you join the VWIDTalk or VW Vortex forums, there is a lot of forums and discussions about retrofits. There are a lot of experts who share their thoughts. And please come in and exchange your ideas, exchange your thoughts, findings. And even if you have some questions about how to move on in that retrofit, we might be able to bounce ideas and move on faster. So please join the VWIDTalk.
And we're very excited that the next episode of this VWIDTalk podcast will be with the renowned enthusiast and now professional vehicle builder, Jamie Orr, who is sought out by people all over the world to come build special versions of cars.
Subscribe so you don't miss that episode when it's released.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.